Hi, in this session, we're going to talk about the programming environment that is required for CPSC 332, which is File Structures and Database Systems. And let's get started with MySQL Workbench, which is what you would need. It basically acts as a tool for data modeling or any SQL development and any administration that you require. Now, for Mac, Windows, or Ubuntu, depending on the operating system you have, there's a link for you to use for downloading. And for Mac, keep in mind that you need the MySQL Workbench along with the MySQL Community version. And for Windows, you would need the MySQL installer for Windows and the DB server. Now, for all the operating systems listed here, I do have a video for your reference that you can use. So follow the steps as you see in the video. And you will see that Oracle offers you either a sign up or login option, or you can continue without sign up and just say, take me to the download. Now, for Mac machines, you can go on System Preferences, click on the MySQL icon, which looks like what you see here. You would stop the MySQL service, and that's basically the stop MySQL server button, which you would be able to see when your service is started. Now, when your server is stopped, that's when you see the start server button. And when it's not started, it would appear in red. If the server is running, it would appear as a green dot here. What you would do is you want to stop the server because you want to initialize your database. You will set a password and use the use legacy password encryption option. Set whatever password you need, make a note of it because you will need that password in the future steps. Now, once you are done with initializing the database, which is, by the way, from the button that you see here, you would then come to click on the Start MySQL Server button. It'll turn green and you're good to go to the next stage. Now you can use MySQL Workbench download from the previous slide where you can set up a local host. Here is what you would need for setting up the connection. You would click on New Connection and you would see a screen that shows up with the options here. Now, for your connection name, you can call it anything such as a local host or local instance. The connection method should be standard TCP/IP, and the parameters should say host name to be local host. Port would automatically be set as 3306. Your username would be root, and the password that you want for your username root would be stored in the keychain so that you don't have to re-enter your password every time you open up MySQL Workbench. So if you store it in keychain, then that way it'll automatically pick it up the next time. And before I take you to the password that you have for the root password, in the previous slide where you were working on the MySQL Workbench download, when you were asked to download, for example, for Mac, MySQL Workbench along with MySQL Community, you would have gotten an option to set the password for your root user. So that same password goes in the keychain here. Once you're done with all the information to be entered, you would click on Test Connection. If everything goes fine, you would see a successful test message. Otherwise, you will have to make sure that the password is correct. The information is provided as you see over here. Now, you can also have a connection for your shell server, which is provided by the computer science department at Cal State Fullerton. And once you have an account on the shell server, you would start the connection method to have standard TCP/IP over SSH. The host name would be shell.ecs.fullerton.edu:22. Now, for your username, this is the username that you have for the shell server. And the password is what you use for logging on to the shell server. So there are two kinds of username and passwords you will enter while you are managing this shell server connection through MySQL Workbench. Now, the first set of username and password would be what you use for logging on to the shell server. It is the same username password you may have used through the command line or through the terminal. And the second set of username and password comes from the MySQL Maria database that is set up on the shell server. So the host name would be set as MariaDB. The server port should be 3306. The usernames should be what has been provided to you. And the password again is the MariaDB password. You can store both the passwords in keychain so that you don't have to re-enter every time. Once everything is set up, you can click on test connection and hopefully you will see a successful connection message. Now for Mac, you can use MySQL from command line. You would set the MySQL home variable with the value as you see here. This is what is set up by the download you did for MySQL Workbench from the previous slide. And if you go on the next step, it asks you to add that path for MySQL home into your path variable using the export command. And then you can start using MySQL from the command line using the command as shown here. Again, keep in mind you should know your root password, enter it when prompted. Now you can also add this path permanently. You would go on the terminal, open up your bash profile file, and add the statements as shown here onto the bash profile file, save the file, and it'll automatically add that path for the future. Now for Windows, if you were to use MySQL Workbench and for any reason you have to reset your password, you can do so by clicking on the Windows key, type services, and you will be able to reset your password. Now, the same steps for Windows as well. You would start and stop the server as and how required, and it should be similar for Ubuntu. Now, with MySQL Workbench, you would have two instances or two connections made so far, one for local instance and the other for your shell server. The steps are similar for any of the operating systems as discussed in the previous slides. Now for MySQL Workbench, to be able to use your shell server smoothly, you just need to make sure you have the right username. Here, it should match with what you're provided with onto the shell server when you made a request or when your accounts were created. And once the setup is done, you would be able to import a data file, which would be a .sql file. That's the extension that is used for SQL files. And let's say you are provided with a SQL file, sample.sql. What you would do is you can use it through MySQL Workbench. All you have to do is you would download the SQL file that is provided and open the file in MySQL Workbench. You can use the local host for opening the SQL file, and that way you don't need any you don't have to worry about any permissions that are required. For example, your SQL file may have creating an entirely new database, and for your local host, you definitely have the permission to create a database to begin with. Now you can do a variety of SQL commands. For example, if you have a company database, you can do a show database command followed by show tables. And then if in the company database, let's say we have an employee table, you can use the describe command to look and take a peek into any of the tables. For example, here is what an employee table would look like after the describe command. And here are a few SQL commands that you can try on MySQL Workbench. Now, this is to get you some practice using the tool, using the software, and these are simple SQL queries that can help you with knowing more about how you can use MySQL Workbench for a variety of SQL commands. And hopefully it is something you're looking for uh, in either of your courses at Cal State Fullerton, or in general for using SQL commands. Now, once you do give these a try, you can also create triggers, which is advanced in SQL, but here you have an option to give these a try and make sure you understand how the commands work. You can create a view. And for any reason, let's say if you do run into an error for any of the downloads that we've discussed so far, here are some steps to keep in mind. Make sure you have the right path, you're using localhost, you have the root password, you have the root username set up for the local host. And for the path, you do add the path that we worked on in the first point here. And then if need be, you can reset your root password. That is all we had for this session. Thank you, everyone.